future of Seanad Eireann. As the summer holidays end, the parties are taking to the streets in an effort to engage and persuade. Fine Gael today announced plans for its regional campaign. The party's Director of Elections for the referendum is Jobs Minister Richard Bruton. He joins me now. Minister, good evening.
Good evening, Mary.
Your posters are telling voters that abolishing the Seanad will save money and cut the number of politicians. Is it as simple as that?
Yes, I think politics must change, and like every other family and business, we have to make substantial changes because politics failed the citizen in the last number of years. So what we're saying is that we can, like other small countries of our size, have an effective one-chamber parliament. In that process, we'll save 30% of the number of national politicians and save 20 million. We believe that this is the correct way for the future. The Senate is, if you like, a watchdog that only barks once in every 50 years, because if you look at its record, the last time when it delayed legislation coming from government was in 1964.
Where are you getting the 20 million figure? It has been a bone of contention since the campaign started.
Well, the 20 million figure comes directly from the Oireachtas Commission, and it's made up of direct costs, which are well known. That's the salaries of senators, their salaries of their staff, and their direct expenses. That comes to 9 million. And in addition, there's what would be described as indirect costs. They're the costs of running the Senate, of having the committees, the procurement, the procedural groups, have the security surrounded, having the offices surrounding it, having the whole panoply that is required to make the Senate work day in, day out.
And Minister Bruton, isn't it those very indirect costs that have been the subject of a lot of confusion? Because how are you going to save them? You're still going to need, you've quoted a figure of, I think it's 1.9 million on the ICT section. How are you going to save that? Procedural sections, 2.8 million in savings. The superintendent section, 1.6 million. People are not going to be made redundant. Ushers aren't going to be made redundant. They'll still be paid.
Like in every agency where we rationalise agencies, people are redeployed to other purposes. So when we no longer have a Senate and we no longer have the requirement that every day there has to be staff servicing that Senate, the bills, the questions that come up in the Senate, those people will be moved to other work, just as we redeploy across the system. One of the strengths of the Croke Park Agreement and the Haddington Road Agreement is that it allows public servants to move from areas where there has been reorganisation and rationalisation to other areas where service is needed. And we've seen huge moves of staff to areas of pressure like the social protection system and so on. So that is the process that will be used to redeploy these resources.
It's time, though, Minister Bruton, to nail this figure, because it has been the subject of confusion and contention, because even the Clerk of the Dáil has questioned this figure.
No, the Clerk of the Dáil hasn't questioned this figure. The Clerk of the Dáil was asked about the direct costs, and he indicated what the direct costs. But the indirect costs are equally ones that will be saved. They will be, those staff and those resources and those offices and all the rest of it will be moved to other purposes. That is the way we have worked in every area where we have rationalised bodies. And as you know, the government has a very extensive programme of rationalising agencies, mergers and so on. And in all of those cases, it's not just the immediate staff who, if you like, cease to be working. It is the redeployment that delivers the savings. And that is standard. The cost of running the Senate has been verified by the Oireachtas Commission as the 20 million figure. It's made up of the two costs, and both of those are going to be saved. Obviously, the indirect cost takes longer to realise because you have to redeploy, but those equally will be saved. People who retire elsewhere will be replaced by people who are formerly working in the Senate, and so on.
But whether it's 10 million or whether it's 70 or whether it's 20 million, you plan on taking more than €3 billion out of the economy in next month's budget, so it's hardly a significant contribution to this.
No one is pretending that the reason for this change is just about saving money, but I think we cannot sneer at saving money. 20 million would employ, for example, 350 primary teachers. But the real thrust of our agenda is we have committed, because politics fails citizens, we've committed to a huge range of reforms. And at the heart of those reforms was the abolition of the Senate. But there were also many other ones, like the creation of an independent fiscal council, like the restoration of the Freedom of Information Act, like giving the Dáil the powers of inquiry, like the new approach to dealing with legislation, which we saw in the Life and Pregnancy Bill recently. There is a whole suite of reforms being implemented, but integral to those is the abolition of the Senate. It's something that we pledged to the people that we would put to them in a referendum. It's at the heart of our reform agenda, both of Fine Gael and of the Labour parties, and we're determined to deliver what we committed to in the general election.
What about reforms to enable Parliament to hold government to account?
Absolutely, we are introducing such reforms, and I think the recent way in which the bill on protecting life in pregnancy gives you an example. The committees will be shaping legislation from its very start, and that was a very important way in which you saw that legislation evolve and improve, with deputies at the very heart of that process. But we've done other things to improve politics too. We've ended corporate donations, so the ideas of vested interests being able to influence things, that's put to an end. Chairs of state bodies are now scrutinised by Oireachtas committees before they're confirmed in position. New powers of inquiry are being brought in by Brendan Howlin. So we are introducing widespread reform in the political system so that we do have a political system that has the capacity, like other small countries of our size, to have a one-chamber parliament, effective in its use of resources and effective at both developing legislation and holding government to account.
You've mentioned lots of legislation there. You mentioned the size of our country as compared to other one-chamber countries. But other countries with one chamber will have highly developed local government systems. We don't have that in this country. In fact, you're reducing local government.
Of course, we are reducing the size of local government, but we're giving it additional powers. At a national level at the moment, we have, on a per head of population compared to countries of similar size, we've actually 50% almost more politicians per head of population than other countries at national level. And we are, at local level, we are rationalising, and that has been Phil Hogan's. We're amalgamating councils, we're making them more effective, we're delivering better services. That is part of our change. We need an effective national parliament that can hold government to account. And that is really the thrust of why we need to reform politics. And at the core of that reform is creating a parliament that's effective, which is elected by all the people, not a chamber like the Senate, in which only 1% of the population participates. And some people, a politician like myself, who's a graduate of NUI, I actually have 6 votes in the Senate. That is a ludicrous situation at a time when 99% of the population, yes, 5 panels, there's 5 panels on which I vote, each one separately, and then I have a vote as a graduate of UCD. I mean, there's absolutely no basis why
but this
individuals
is where
should have that.
People suggest reform, but the polls at the moment are suggesting as well that perhaps what people in this country want is reform rather than abolition.
Look, since this chamber was first established back in 1937, people have realised that it has been simply not fit for purpose. And there's been 10 separate studies on reform.
And our legislators have
failed
to implement reform.
Absolutely. 3 of those reports on reform were presented to Fianna Fáil when they were in government with the PDs, and nothing was done about it. But we brought forward a programme of reform based on an assessment of the failure that occurred in politics, and that recognised that, like other small countries, we do not need a second chamber. We do not need to try to spend our time scratching around for a purpose for this chamber.
Just finally, though, unlike Nice or Lisbon, you're not going to go back to the people again if they refuse to vote for abolition. So have you a reform programme?
Fine Gael and Labour have a very detailed reform programme which we're implementing.
No,
we are not.
If people reject in this referendum the abolition argument, will you reform?
We've no intention of changing the Senate. Our proposal has been a reform of politics to make it more effective, to make it smaller, to make do with fewer politicians, to save money, and to become like other small countries of our size, effective with one parliament. We are not considering reforms of a house that has proven itself ineffective, whose mandate is completely rigged. It's not a proper legitimate mandate based on the electoral system that's in place. We do not need it.
So you want it abolished. Will you have all your party out on the streets, knocking on doors, campaigning for abolition?
Well, everyone who stood for Fine Gael stood on this platform of political reform, at the heart of which was the abolition of the Senate. But I recognise there are some people who don't agree with this, and that shows that this is a reform that doesn't always meet the needs of politicians, because, as Michael McDowell once said, he described the Senate as a cross between a political convalescent home and a creche, and a lot of politicians like that sort of an environment.
Your
but we're very
colleagues in the
clear,
Seanad,
it has no place in a reformed political structure.
Your Fine Gael colleagues in the Seanad come out to vote for their abolition?
I'm sure they will. They stood on this platform, but what I'm determined to do is bring this argument to the people, bring the information out there about the way in which the Senate is elected, its failure and inability to delay any activity, its inability, the total frustrated history of trying to reform it. We now need to make decisions, and a simple choice has been put to the
first
people.
Week in October. Richard Bruton, thank you very much for joining us this evening. It's 5:33. We'll take a quick break before we go to Siobhan with sport.